13. Lane Staley, 1967–2002. Lane Staley was the haunting voice behind the band Alice in Chains, a group that defined the grunge movement in the early 1990s alongside bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam. He possessed a vocal range that was both aggressive and deeply sorrowful, capable of projecting immense power and fragile vulnerability within the same breath. His lyrics often dealt with pain, depression, and addiction, themes that resonated deeply with a generation of young people feeling displaced and misunderstood. As the frontman of Alice in Chains, Staley achieved massive commercial success. Albums like Dirt, released in 1992, became anthems for the era, selling millions of copies and cementing his status as a rock icon. However, the fame that elevated Staley also fueled the isolation that would eventually destroy him. He did not seek the spotlight in the way many rock stars did. Rather, he seemed to retreat further into himself as his celebrity grew. The scrutiny of the media and the pressures of touring weighed heavily on him. Following the death of his fiancée in 1996, Staley largely withdrew from the public eye. He ceased touring and rarely recorded, becoming a recluse in his Seattle condominium. His battle with substance abuse, which had been public knowledge for years, spiraled out of control in the absence of his professional obligations and personal support system. Lane Staley died on April 5, 2002, though his body was not discovered until 2 weeks later. He passed away in his home, alone, surrounded by the paraphernalia of his addiction. The cause of death was determined to be a mixture of heroin and cocaine, often referred to as a speedball. The tragedy of his death was compounded by the fact that he died on the same calendar day as Kurt Cobain, 8 years later, marking a dark anniversary for the Seattle music scene. He was 34 years old. His remains were cremated. Because he was cremated, there is no traditional burial plot for fans to visit in a cemetery. However, his legacy is memorialized in several ways that serve as a pilgrimage for his followers. The most significant physical location associated with him was his condominium in the University District of Seattle, where fans would often leave flowers and notes at the gate. However, for a designated place of remembrance, fans often looked to the Seattle Center or the International Fountain, where public vigils were held following the announcement of his death. In 2022, on what would have been his 55th birthday, a more formal tribute was established. While not a grave, it serves the function of a memorial site where his fame and tragedy intersect. The community and his remaining family have focused on addiction recovery advocacy in his name. Staley's lack of a physical grave speaks to the isolation of his final years. He faded away behind closed doors, hidden from the fame that had once broadcast his face to the world. 12. Karen Carpenter, 1950–1983. Karen Carpenter possessed one of the most distinct and recognizable voices in the history of popular music. As the vocalist for the Carpenters, the duo she formed with her brother Richard, she dominated the charts in the 1970s. Her voice was often described as velvety and melancholic, perfect for the ballads that made the group famous, such as Close to You and We've Only Just Begun. She was a drumming prodigy as well, though her role behind the drum kit was eventually minimized by producers who wanted her standing at the microphone, front and center. The pressure of maintaining a wholesome, perfect image in the public eye took a severe toll on Karen. The Carpenters were marketed as the clean-cut antidote to the rebellious rock music of the era, placing a burden of perfection on her shoulders. Behind the scenes, she struggled immensely with anorexia nervosa, an eating disorder that was widely misunderstood and rarely discussed at the time. The demands of constant touring and the scrutiny of her appearance by the press and industry executives exacerbated her condition. She attempted to regain control over her life through extreme dieting, a reaction to the lack of control she felt in her career and personal decisions. Karen Carpenter died on February 4, 1983, at the age of 32. She suffered heart failure caused by complications from her illness. Her death was a shock to the world and brought international attention to eating disorders, which until then had been shrouded in secrecy. She died in her parents' home in Downey, California, having recently returned from therapy in New York, believing she was on the road to recovery. Originally, Karen was interred at the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Cypress, California, in a crypt within the Ascension Mausoleum. For over 20 years, this was her resting place, and it became a shrine for fans who adored her music. However, the story of her grave took a turn in 2003. Her brother, Richard Carpenter, decided to move her remains, along with those of their parents, to a new location. Today, Karen Carpenter rests at the Pierce Brothers Valley Oaks Memorial Park in Westlake Village, California. The move was reportedly due to the family wanting a location closer to Richard's home and a more private, secure environment. Her current resting place is a large, private family mausoleum, distinct and grand. It features a polished stone structure with a gated entrance. Through the glass, visitors can see the inscription on her crypt, which reads, "A star on earth, a star in heaven." The site is meticulously maintained, surrounded by manicured gardens. While the move caused some controversy among fans who were attached to the original site, the new grave reflects the protective nature of her family, arguably the same protectiveness and control that defined her life and contributed to the pressures she faced. 11. Florence Ballard, 1943–1976. Florence Ballard was a founding member of the Supremes, the most successful American vocal group of the 1960s. It was Ballard who named the group and provided the soulful, gritty voice that drove their early sound. She sang on 10 number-one hits and was integral to the Motown machine that changed the face of music. Her achievements included breaking racial barriers in entertainment and setting the standard for the girl group image that persists today. However, Ballard became one of the earliest and most tragic examples of a star chewed up by the machinery of fame. As Motown executive Berry Gordy decided to shift the focus to Diana Ross, Ballard was systematically pushed into the background. The internal politics and the erasure of her contributions led to resentment, depression, and alcoholism. In 1967, she was fired from the group she had founded. Following her dismissal, she faced a rapid decline into poverty. She lost her home, was forced to go on welfare, and struggled to feed her 3 children, all while her former bandmates continued to achieve global superstardom. Florence Ballard died on February 22, 1976, at the tragically young age of 32. The cause of death was coronary thrombosis, a blood clot in one of the coronary arteries. Her health had deteriorated due to the stress of her financial ruin, her depression, and her reliance on alcohol to numb the pain of her fall from grace. At the time of her death, she was making small steps toward a comeback, but her body had already succumbed to the years of struggle. She is buried in Detroit Memorial Park in Warren, Michigan. For many years, her grave was a symbol of the neglect she faced in life. It was a simple, modest marker that belied her status as music royalty. The location is Section J, Lot 87. In later years, as her legacy was reappraised and fans recognized the injustice of her treatment, efforts were made to honor her more appropriately. The grave is now a site of pilgrimage for those who view her as the lost supreme. It is often adorned with flowers left by fans who traveled to Detroit specifically to pay respects to the woman whose voice started it all. The contrast between the opulence of the Supreme's legacy and the humble nature of her burial site for many years served as a stark reminder of the disposable nature of fame in the music industry. Even now, while better maintained, it stands in quiet contrast to the glitz of the Motown era she helped build. 10. Brian Jones, 1942–1969. Brian Jones was the founder and original leader of the Rolling Stones. A multi-instrumentalist of immense talent, he was responsible for the band's name and their early musical direction, incorporating blues and R&B into the British rock sound. He was a fashion icon of swinging London, known for his mop-top hair, flamboyant clothes, and rebellious attitude. Jones could play almost any instrument he picked up, contributing the marimbas to Under My Thumb and the sitar to Paint It Black. As the band grew famous, the power dynamic shifted toward Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, who became the primary songwriters. Jones felt alienated and marginalized within his own band. He coped with his diminishing role and the pressures of fame through excessive drug and alcohol use. His behavior became erratic, and he became unreliable in the studio and on stage. In June of 1969, he was asked to leave the Rolling Stones. Less than a month later, on July 3, 1969, Brian Jones was found motionless at the bottom of his swimming pool at Cochford Farm in East Sussex. The coroner's report stated death by misadventure, noting that his liver and heart were enlarged from drug and alcohol abuse. He was 27 years old, becoming one of the first major figures in what would later be known as the 27 Club. Brian Jones is buried in Cheltenham Cemetery in Gloucestershire, England. His funeral was a spectacle of the era, though notably Charlie Watts and Bill Wyman were the only Rolling Stones to attend. His grave is located in a quiet section of the cemetery, marked by a headstone that has changed over time due to wear and vandalism. The grave is grand, featuring a slab of marble and an inscription that highlights his role in the Rolling Stones. However, the site has suffered from the effects of his controversial fame. In the years immediately following his death, the grave was frequently stripped of ornaments by souvenir hunters. It became a gathering place for counterculture fans, leading to complaints from locals about noise and drug use in the cemetery. Because of this, the grave has had to be restored and cleaned multiple times. The heavy metal letters on his headstone have oxidized and been polished repeatedly. It stands as a somber monument in a traditional English cemetery, a final resting place for a man who lived a life of chaos and excess, eventually consumed by the lifestyle he helped pioneer. 9. Dennis Wilson, 1944–1983. Dennis Wilson was the drummer for the Beach Boys and the only member of the group who actually surfed. While his brothers and cousin crafted the vocal harmonies, Dennis embodied the sun-soaked, rebellious spirit of the California myth they sang about. He was a sex symbol and, later in his career, revealed himself to be a talented songwriter with his solo album Pacific Ocean Blue. Dennis lived the rock and roll lifestyle to the extreme. He was generous to a fault, often allowing fans and hangers-on to live in his home and drive his cars. This lack of boundaries famously led him to associate with Charles Manson before the Tate LaBianca murders, a connection that haunted him and damaged his reputation. As the years went on, his addiction to alcohol and cocaine severely impacted his voice, his drumming, and his personal life. He spent his fortune, lost his boat, and eventually became homeless, living a nomadic existence in Los Angeles, estranged from the band he helped make famous. On December 28, 1983, Dennis Wilson drowned at Marina del Rey in Los Angeles. He had been diving into the cold water of the marina, attempting to recover items he had thrown overboard from his yacht years prior during a fit of rage. After drinking heavily, he dove down and never resurfaced. He was 39 years old. His grave is unique because he does not have one on land. Dennis Wilson was buried at sea. This was a point of contention and required special intervention. U.S. Coast Guard regulations usually required cremation before a burial at sea, or for the burial to take place in specific deep waters which were not easily accessible for a civilian funeral. However, due to his stature and the intervention of President Ronald Reagan, a fan of the Beach Boys, permission was granted for a full-body burial at sea. On January 4, 1984, his body was committed to the Pacific Ocean off the California coast, the very ocean that defined his life and music. While there is no headstone for fans to visit, this vast, fluid grave is perhaps the most fitting for him. Fans often visit the marina where he died or the beaches of Southern California to pay their respects. The ocean itself serves as his memorial, a reminder of the surfer girl and catch a wave era and the dark undertow that eventually pulled him down. 8. Janis Joplin, 1943–1970. Janis Joplin was the queen of psychedelic soul. Bursting out of the San Francisco music scene in the late 1960s, she possessed a voice that was raw, explosive, and deeply emotional. She redefined what it meant to be a female rock star, eschewing the polished girl group image for beads, bows, and uninhibited passion. Her performances at the Monterey Pop Festival and Woodstock are legendary. Despite the adoration of millions, Joplin suffered from crippling loneliness and low self-esteem, stemming from a difficult adolescence in Texas where she was bullied and ostracized. She famously said, "On stage, I make love to 25,000 different people. Then I go home alone. She used heroin and alcohol to cope with the pressure of fame and the silence that followed the applause. The more famous she became, the more isolated she felt, surrounded by enablers and industry figures. Janis Joplin died on October 4, 1970, at the Landmark Motor Hotel in Hollywood. She was found dead on the floor beside her bed. The cause was an accidental heroin overdose, likely compounded by alcohol. She had recently recorded the song Mercedes-Benz and a birthday greeting for John Lennon. She was 27 years old. Like Dennis Wilson and Lane Staley, Janis Joplin has no grave in the traditional sense. She was cremated at the Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park and Mortuary in Los Angeles. Her ashes were then scattered from a plane into the Pacific Ocean along Stinson Beach in Marin County, California. The ceremony was small and private, attended only by her parents and close relatives. However, because fans need a place to mourn, several proxy graves exist. There is a small memorial plaque at the Mystic Westwood Village Memorial Park, but her true memorial is the coastline of Northern California. Fans also visit the hotel where she died, now the Highland Gardens Hotel, and leave messages in the room where she passed. In her hometown of Port Arthur, Texas, there is a museum and a marker, but her physical remains are lost to the currents. This dispersal fits her restless spirit. She was a woman who never felt she truly belonged anywhere, and in death she became part of the elements, free from the fame that both made and destroyed her. 7. Jim Morrison, 1943–1971. Jim Morrison, the lead singer of The Doors, was a poet, a provocateur, and one of the most charismatic frontmen in rock history. With hits like Light My Fire and The End, he challenged authority and social norms. He viewed himself more as a writer and shaman than a pop singer. His stage persona was unpredictable. He could be mesmerizing one night and violent the next. Morrison's relationship with fame was antagonistic. He hated being a teen idol and rebelled against his own image by gaining weight, growing a beard, and behaving erratically. His alcoholism was severe, and he faced legal troubles, including a conviction for indecent exposure, which was posthumously pardoned. In an attempt to escape the toxic environment of the American rock scene and focus on his poetry, he moved to Paris, France, in March of 1971. He died on July 3, 1971, in a bathtub in his Paris apartment. He was 27 years old. No autopsy was performed because French law did not require one if no foul play was suspected, leading to decades of conspiracy theories. The official cause was listed as heart failure, though it is widely believed to be an accidental heroin overdose. Jim Morrison is buried in Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, arguably the most famous cemetery in the world. His grave is one of the most visited tourist attractions in Paris, rivaling the Eiffel Tower in popularity among certain demographics. However, the fame that he tried to escape has decimated his resting place. For decades, the grave was a site of chaotic vandalism. Fans would cover the surrounding tombstones with graffiti, leave drug paraphernalia, and drink alcohol by the grave. A bust of Morrison that was placed on the grave in 1981 was stolen by vandals in 1988. The surrounding graves of French families were often desecrated by fans trying to get close to Morrison. To protect the site, the cemetery administration had to erect a metal barricade around the plot. A security guard is often stationed nearby to prevent people from jumping the fence. The grave is now a simple flat stone with a bronze plaque bearing the Greek inscription, Kata ton daimona eitoi, which roughly translates to, true to his own spirit. Despite the barriers, fans still throw flowers, notes, and cigarettes over the fence. The destruction of the piece at Père Lachaise is a direct result of his enduring cult-like fame. 6. Amy Winehouse, 1983–2011. Amy Winehouse was a vocal powerhouse who revitalized British soul music. Her album, Back to Black, is a masterpiece of modern music, blending jazz, soul, and R&B with raw, confessional lyrics. She won 5 Grammy Awards in a single night, tying a record at the time. Her voice was timeless, often compared to Dinah Washington and Sarah Vaughan. Amy's destruction by fame was played out in real time by the 24-hour news cycle and the rise of paparazzi culture. Every stumble, every drink, and every argument was photographed and splashed across tabloids. She struggled with drug addiction and bulimia, but it was alcohol that became her primary demon. The media treated her addiction as a joke, mocking her fragile state rather than offering empathy. The pressure to perform while unwell, combined with toxic relationships and relentless hounding by photographers, trapped her in a cycle of abuse. Amy Winehouse died on July 23, 2011, at her home in Camden, London. The coroner recorded a verdict of misadventure, confirming that she died of alcohol poisoning. Her blood alcohol content was more than 5 times the legal driving limit. She was 27 years old. She was cremated at Golders Green Crematorium in London. Her ashes were interred in the Edgwarebury Lane Cemetery in Edgware, Greater London. Originally, her grave was marked with a black headstone with pink writing, featuring a drawing of a songbird. She is buried with her grandmother, Cynthia, who was a major influence on her life and style. The grave is a site of constant visitation. It is a Jewish cemetery, and traditionally, visitors leave stones on the grave. Amy's headstone is often piled high with stones, as well as cigarettes, alcohol bottles, controversially, and letters. The stone had to be set into the ground securely to withstand the volume of visitors. Later, a new, more prominent black marble headstone was erected, listing both Amy and her grandmother. The inscription is simple, but the site represents the tragedy of a talent watched by the world as it collapsed. The cemetery has had to increase security and monitoring around the grave to ensure it remains respectful, as fans often try to leave tributes that are inappropriate for a conservative religious burial ground. 5. Whitney Houston, 1963-2012. Whitney Houston was the voice. She was the most awarded female act of all time, known for her powerful, soaring vocals and immense range. Her version of I Will Always Love You is one of the best-selling singles in history. She was a crossover superstar who excelled in music and film, maintaining a polished, regal image for the first half of her career. However, the pressure to maintain that pristine image while dealing with personal turmoil and a volatile marriage led to a slow, public decline. Rumors of drug use began to circulate in the late 1990s. By the 2000s, her voice had deteriorated, and her erratic behavior was fodder for reality television and late-night comedians. The industry that had built her up turned its back on her, and the public watched her struggle with addiction without understanding the depth of her pain. Whitney Houston died on February 11, 2012, at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Beverly Hills, California. She was found submerged in the bathtub of her suite. The cause of death was accidental drowning, with heart disease and cocaine use listed as contributing factors. The uncanny similarity to her lifestyle and the location, a hotel bathroom, shocked the world. She was 48 years old. Whitney Houston is buried at Fairview Cemetery in Westfield, New Jersey. She was laid to rest next to her father, John Russell Houston, who had died in 2003. The burial was a private affair following a highly publicized funeral, but the gravesite quickly became a target for the public. For months after her burial, the cemetery had to be closed to the general public because the influx of fans was unmanageable. Security guards were posted 24 hours a day to prevent vandalism and to stop people from taking souvenirs from the fresh grave. It took some time for a permanent headstone to be placed. When it was finally revealed, the teardrop-shaped monument featured a heart and the lyrics, "I Will Always Love You." Tragically, 3 years later, her daughter Bobby Christina Brown was buried in the same plot, right next to her mother, after dying in eerily similar circumstances. The grave is now a double tragedy, a monument to a family lineage broken by the machinery of fame and addiction. The grass around the plot is often worn down by the feet of thousands of visitors who come to pay respects to the woman who once had it all. 4. Kurt Cobain, 1967-1994. Kurt Cobain was the reluctant spokesman of Generation X. As the frontman of Nirvana, he brought alternative rock to the masses with the song "Smells Like Teen Spirit." He was a sensitive, artistic soul who despised the corporate machinery of the music industry, and the jock mentality he felt was embraced by his own fan base. He wanted his music to be heard, but he hated the fame that came with it. Cobain suffered from chronic stomach pain, which he self-medicated with heroin. The combination of physical pain, severe depression, and the overwhelming intrusion of the media created a trap he felt he could not escape. He worried constantly that he was selling out and felt like a fraud for not enjoying the adoration of the crowd. Kurt Cobain died on April 5, 1994, at his home in Seattle, Washington. He was found 3 days later by an electrician. He had died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He was 27 years old. Kurt Cobain does not have a grave. His body was cremated and his ashes were divided. Some were scattered in the Wishkah River in Washington state, a place he held dear. Some were kept by his widow, Courtney Love, and some were reportedly made into Buddhist memorial sculptures. Because there is no grave, fans created their own shrines. The most famous of these is the bench in Veretta Park, a small public park adjacent to his former home in Seattle. The park benches are covered in graffiti messages written by fans from all over the world. They write lyrics, messages of love, and apologies that the world didn't understand him. The city of Seattle has debated replacing the benches, but they are constantly re-graffitied, becoming a living monument. Another unofficial grave is the sign for the town of Aberdeen, Washington, which says, "Come as you are." Fans flock there to see the bridge mentioned in his songs. The lack of a central grave has dispersed the grief of his fans across the Pacific Northwest. The destruction of his shrine, the park benches, by constant writing is a physical manifestation of how his fans' love was overwhelming, literally covering every inch of space available, just as the media covered every inch of his life. 3. Michael Jackson, 1958-2009. Michael Jackson was the king of pop. A child prodigy who became the most famous human being on the planet, his contributions to music, dance, and fashion are immeasurable. Thriller remains the best-selling album of all time. He broke racial barriers on MTV and set the standard for the modern pop spectacle. However, Jackson's fame was perhaps the most destructive of all. He lived in a bubble of isolation, surrounded by yes men and cut off from reality. His physical appearance changed drastically due to surgeries and skin conditions, making him a target for ridicule. He faced serious legal allegations that, despite acquittal, tarnished his legacy and increased his paranoia. To cope with chronic pain, insomnia, and the immense pressure of his planned comeback concerts, he became dependent on powerful medical anesthetics. Michael Jackson died on June 25, 2009, at his rented mansion in Los Angeles. He died of acute propofol and benzodiazepine intoxication. His personal physician administered the drugs to help him sleep, an action that was later deemed involuntary manslaughter. He was 50 years old. Michael Jackson is entombed in the Great Mausoleum at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. Specifically, he is in the Holly Terrace section. Unlike the other graves on this list, Michael Jackson's grave is completely inaccessible to the public. The Great Mausoleum is a massive, cathedral-like structure that houses many Hollywood legends, but Jackson's crypt is heavily guarded. For months after his death, fans swarmed the gates of Forest Lawn, leaving mountains of flowers, teddy bears, and posters that stretched for city blocks. The cemetery administration had to hire extra security and strictly enforce a family-only policy for the mausoleum. Because fans cannot get to the actual grave, they have turned the area outside the mausoleum into a shrine. They write messages on the concrete curbs and leave tributes at the gates. The inaccessibility of his grave mirrors his life. He is locked away in a gilded cage, beautiful but unreachable, protected from the mob that both loved and consumed him. Even in death, he requires security clearance and high walls to maintain peace, a final testament to a level of fame that made a normal existence, and a normal burial, impossible. 2. John Lennon, 1940-1980. John Lennon was the intellectual heart of the Beatles. His songwriting partnership with Paul McCartney revolutionized popular music. After the Beatles, Lennon became a potent political activist, using his fame to campaign for peace. His song Imagine became a secular hymn for the world. He was a figure who preached love and accessibility, often walking the streets of New York City without bodyguards, believing that people would respect his space. This openness, combined with his colossal fame, led to his destruction. Mark David Chapman, a disturbed fan who was obsessed with Lennon and angered by his more popular than Jesus quote and his lifestyle, decided to kill him to steal his fame. John Lennon was murdered on December 8, 1980. He was shot 4 times in the back outside his apartment building, the Dakota, in New York City. He was 40 years old. John Lennon was cremated at the Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York. There was no funeral to prevent a media circus and mass hysteria. His ashes were scattered in Central Park, across the street from where he lived and died. In 1985, that area of Central Park was dedicated as Strawberry Fields. It is a landscaped section of the park featuring a black and white mosaic with the word Imagine in the center. This is his grave in the eyes of the world. It is one of the most visited spots in New York City. The mosaic itself is often covered in flowers, candles, and peace signs. On the anniversary of his birth and death, thousands of people gather there to sing Beatles songs. The grave is not destroyed in the sense of vandalism, but it is destroyed by the sheer volume of love and foot traffic. The tiles of the mosaic have to be maintained carefully. It is a place where the fame that killed him is reclaimed by the fans who loved him. It is a communal grave, open to the sky and the city he loved, contrasting with the violence of his death. 1. Elvis Presley, 1935–1977. Elvis Presley is the ultimate example of a star destroyed by fame. He was the king, the man who popularized rock and roll and changed the cultural landscape of the 20th century. He was the most photographed, most talked about, and most worshipped entertainer of his time. But Elvis became a prisoner of his own success. In his later years, he was trapped in Las Vegas residencies and grueling tours orchestrated by his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, to pay off gambling debts. Elvis was surrounded by the Memphis Mafia, a group of friends and employees who catered to his every whim but also insulated him from reality. He suffered from glaucoma, high blood pressure, liver damage, and an enlarged colon, all exacerbated by a massive prescription drug addiction. He took uppers to wake up, downers to sleep, and painkillers to function. He was lonely, paranoid, and physically deteriorating, yet he continued to perform until the very end. Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977, at his Graceland mansion in Memphis, Tennessee. He was found on the floor of his bathroom. The cause of death was officially cardiac arrhythmia, but it is widely accepted that polypharmacy, multiple drug ingestion, was the primary cause. He was 42 years old. The story of his grave is as dramatic as his life. Originally, Elvis was buried in a mausoleum at Forest Hill Cemetery in Memphis, next to his mother, Gladys. However, on August 29, 1977, less than 2 weeks after the funeral, 3 men were arrested at the cemetery with tools, attempting to steal Elvis's body. They planned to hold the remains for ransom. Because of this security threat, Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, received permission to move the bodies of Elvis and Gladys to Graceland. On October 2, 1977, they were reburied in the meditation garden on the grounds of the mansion. Today, the grave of Elvis Presley is one of the most famous tourist sites in the United States, visited by over 600,000 people a year. The grave is a flat bronze plaque surrounded by flowers and an eternal flame. It lies near a curved brick wall with stained glass windows. The site is a shrine to fame. The destruction comes from the commodification of his death. To see the grave, one must usually buy a ticket to tour the mansion. It is part of the Elvis experience. The grave is constantly surrounded by weeping fans, flash photography, and tour guides. It is a beautiful spot, but it is also a commercial hub. Elvis could not find peace in life, and in death, he is the centerpiece of a multi-million-dollar enterprise. His grave is the final stop on a tour that showcases the excess that killed him. The meditation garden, intended for quiet reflection, is the busiest spot in Memphis, proving that for the king, the show never truly ends.